Well, I think the fear is entirely understandable and natural and normal. And I think it would be an unusual type of person who genuinely didn't feel any trepidation when considering their own mortality. I think sometimes these days there's a tendency for people in a very well-meaning sense to say, look, death is entirely natural. It's the one thing that we're all guaranteed to experience, come what may. There's nothing we can do about that. It's inevitable and normal for every one of us. So why can't we just embrace it and not fear it, not see it as a taboo, and just be very open and accepting of it? And I think actually, in a way, the precise opposite. I think the enormity of being a living creature who knows from the outset, from the moment we're able to understand these things, that we are going to die, that every single thing we love about this world and the people in it are going to slip through our fingers, whether we like it or not, is astonishing. It's a defining aspect of being human. And I think you can simultaneously think this is normal now and inevitable, and also momentous, because if we love the world and we love the people and the things and the creatures in it, how can we not feel a sense of enormity at having to lose them all?
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think probably it's biphasic in life, isn't it? That the midlife crisis is the point at which you start to think not that people who are precious to you might die, but that I might die. I will die. And actually, somehow there's a sense now of time passing. The preciousness of time sometimes translates into unfortunate behaviors, and sometimes into behaviors that are much more about embracing what is now and seizing the day. So I think there's a great wisdom from understanding that we're mortal that runs in parallel with that fear of separation, annihilation, or depending on the person's viewpoint and faith, maybe judgment or condemnation, the unknown. And it's the same as the fear of the dark, isn't it? That what we can't see, what we can't know, we imagine, and it's much more frightening than what we know.
And that fear almost has been around, hasn't it, for all of human history and all of human civilization. And many might argue that constructs like religion or indeed medicine are in part a response to it. But I just wondered, what do we think the fear's of? Is it a fear of not being here, of loss, or is it a fear of dying itself, and perhaps the suffering that we understand or believe may or may not be attached to that? What do you two think?
Really interesting and very person specific, I think. I mean, that's certainly my experience in the hospice. I really like to ask patients if they might be willing to talk to me about what they're most frightened of, because very often the answer will be very, very revealing. It might be that sense of one's own annihilation. So some people, I'm thinking of Philip Larkin especially, who's written so beautifully about that sort of haunting existential void, the idea that he could no longer exist for the rest of time, appalled him. I think sometimes people, much less commonly in my experience than fear around the symptoms that may accompany the end of life. And as Kathryn says, if we inhabit a society where this is a taboo subject, one that people find difficult to talk about, tempting to shrink away from, which I think is certainly the case, then there's a void into which we can pour our imaginations and start to fear the worst, and nothing feeds fears like the dark. They just expands to fill the void. But sometimes I'm astonished by people's most powerful fear. So I have encountered individuals who have answered that question, what they're most afraid of, by saying, what will happen to my cat when I'm gone? Or who will feed the birds in the garden when I'm gone? things that seem very insignificant and of course for whatever reason have incredible importance to that individual, that you can sometimes unpick in conversation. And I find that really interesting, because I think the fear is as diverse as human beings are, and it's important never to make assumptions about what drives it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Kathryn?
I think that's perfect. And I think we're very privileged in palliative care because we do unpick that fear with people who are prepared to talk to us about it. And so we'll meet people who say, well, the thing is, she's terrified of dying. Can you come and help? And I will say, and what is it about dying that she's terrified of? And this person, this doctor or nurse is referring, will look at me as if I'm crazy. Like, you really think I'm going to ask that? But actually, I'm terrified of dying is the beginning of a conversation. It's not the end of a conversation. And if we use questions rather than rushing to reassure and calm and console, we can explore those fears in a way that people find helpful, to name it and to explore it. I guess it's a little bit like turning a torch on in the dark, or being somebody's companion in the dark. What is it about the idea of dying that's distressing you the most? And when they tell you that thing, to simply accept that is the thing, and ask what it is about that is distressing you the most. What is it about the fact that nobody will feed the birds in the garden that distresses you the most? Because people end up at the most extraordinary place. So I'm terrified of dying because I've got a picture of seeing my children in the playground on their own with nobody to console them. God, that's awful. I would feel dreadful if that were my picture. But my job is actually to unpick that further. What is it about the sense of them being left alone that causes you the most distress? And when we unpicked that for that lady, it was, there's nobody to tell my daughter about periods.
So it sounds as though...
never guess that, could you?
No, and it sounds as though you're both agreeing that that it's a reasonable... Fear itself is a reasonable encompassing word for many of these differing responses. Is that a fair point?
I think it's a combination of fear and sorrow, and fear of the fear and fear of the sorrow. So
Yes.
if I in some way stay in this place where I'm not engaging my mind in that, I don't have to feel those terrible feelings. But it's incredibly hard work to stay in the place that doesn't engage with those thoughts and those feelings, and people end up exhausted, where actually the relief of taking the lid off that box and just looking inside it sometimes enables them to no longer fear the fear and fear the sorrow, to discover that actually it passes and I can
Yes.
get back to being myself and feeling contained again.